One of the most challenging fronts in Helldivers 2 is the Automaton front. These robotic menaces have higher levels of armor, the ability to snipe you, and rockets that are sure to ragdoll you all over the place. And now, there's even more dangerous enemies to contend with. And so, if you want to stop these bots, you're going to need some serious weaponry. And what better thing to have by your side than your support weapon? A stratagem you can call down to give you some serious firepower. But this all begs the question, which of these are the best and which of these are the worst for facing off against the Automatons? Dr. Pooplove here, and that's what I hope to find out. In this video, I will be ranking each of the support weapon stratagems versus the bots on a tier list, with S being the best and Poop Hater being the worst. Starting with the MG43 machine gun, which is a medium armor penetrating fully automatic rifle with a large mag size, multiple fire rate modifications, and a stationary reload. And despite not seeming like it has any real place on the bot front, you may actually be sleeping at least a little bit on the potential of this. But speaking of sleep, let's first talk about today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. This summer is hot, and whether you are touching grass or gathering some serious gamer sweat, you're going to want to cool off and relax. That's where Manta Sleep's sleep masks come in. They have these cool masks designed to soothe your eyes and allow for you to drift into a gentle slumber. And they feel so good. All you have to do is pop these in the freezer, take them out when they're cold, fit them onto your Manta Sleep mask, and you will be sleeping in no time. I actually really like using these after looking at my gaming screen for a while, because the coolness just relaxes my eyes. But Manta Sleep actually has many different mask types, like the steam mask, the weighted mask, or the silk mask, allowing you to really customize your sleep experience to whatever works for you. So, what are you waiting for? Go to mantasleep.com to get your sleep mask today. Use my link or enter promo code POOPLOVE10 at checkout to get 10% off your next order. That's 10% off by clicking my link and entering POOPLOVE10 at checkout. Level up your sleep game. But now, back to the video. So when we use the machine gun versus the bots, this feels pretty nice. This has medium armor penetration, so that is going to be good against a lot of the bots. And I like that it does have a pretty decent magazine size. This allows you to shred through groups of medium enemies like the Devastators and the Berserkers, as well as strip through the Strider legs or even get them good in the crotch. Unfortunately, it's not really going to help in taking the Hulks head on, but it can take out the gunships and the tanks, although it may take a good deal of bullets in order to take them down. This also can take down a factory Strider, but again, a lot of bullets. One thing this cannot take out at all is the new War Strider, which has heavy armor penetration and above, which means if you want to take this out, you're just going to need to have something a little more powerful for these guys. Overall, I like it. It's not the best, but I do love its ability to take out medium and below enemies, and so I can see it having a role for that. I'll give it a B. But on such a long-range front, you may want to opt for the APW-1 anti-material rifle, which is a sniper rifle with high-impact, heavy armor penetrating shots. And versus the bots, this feels amazing. You face these guys at range, which puts this in a very good spot as you can snipe everything. And I do mean everything. Striders, Berserkers, Devastators, even gunships, even Hulks, and tanks can be taken out nicely. This also is pretty decent for the War Striders, being able to knock out their arms and essentially disarm them, or go for their legs or crotch to kill them outright. Factory Striders do take a little bit to take out, but this still can do the trick. And given you do get a pretty good amount of ammo, you can basically use this as an overpowered primary, leaving your actual primary to take out the little guys or anything closer range. It's pretty reliable, but maybe not super outstanding. I will give it an A for the bots. But now for the M105 Stalwart, which is a light armor penetrating assault rifle with a large magazine. And for the bots, this is not the best. While it feels nice on the small guys and it can actually take Hulk sinks out pretty quickly, the main drawback here is that this is only light armor penetrating. As a result, you are left only to be able to go for weak spots on some of the enemies, and other enemies you're just not going to be able to hurt at all. It certainly does help now that the Strider legs are light armor penetrating, meaning you do have a better chance of going against these guys, especially the rocket Striders, being able to hit them in the legs or also their rockets. But to me, that's not enough to make this an amazing pick. I can see this as a way to maybe lay down fire to get berserkers off your back quickly and other smaller enemies, but ultimately it doesn't feel like a good use of a stratagem slot on this front, and I don't think the value here is really worth it. It's a C tier for the bots. Now, next is the EAT-17 Expendable Anti-Tank. This is an expendable rocket launcher with a very quick cooldown time and 2 launchers each. And versus the bots, this is very solid, being able to take out large structures and bigger enemies like the hulks, gunships, fabricators, and tanks with a single shot, as well as factory striders with 2 shots. For war striders, this can damage them anywhere, but a well-placed crotch shot will wipe them out in one go. Also, I don't know about you, but I do tend to die a little bit more on bot missions to crazy things like rockets, so not needing to run into danger in order to re-pick up my support weapon is nice. The cooldown here is so fast that you can just get a new one pretty quickly and get right back into the fight. I like this a lot.
I will give it an A for the bots.
But what if the EAT was not expendable and was even stronger? You would then have the GR8 Recoilless Rifle, which is an anti-tank rocket launcher similar to the EAT, but it does more damage. It has a backpack for ammo and programmable ammo to switch between splash and anti-tank damage as well. Now, versus the bots, I initially was not a fan, but I have since been converted, and this is simply amazing. Mostly because this one-shots most of the biggest things in the game. Hulks get one shot. Tanks get one shot. Gunships get one shot. Bot fabricators can even get one shot. Even the big boy fabricators can get one shot. Factory striders, which often take multiple shots from a lot of things, can also be one shot, although in the heat of things, it may take 2. And this also is very consistent at one-shotting the war striders as long as you just hit them in their crotch, and that is awesome. This did get a slight nerf in that it can no longer shoot a dropship in the middle for a one-shot down, but you can still one-shot them if you go for their thrusters. Now, as you face enemies at range, this doesn't suffer too badly from having a stationary reload, as you can just get a little cover and do it from afar. The programmable ammo here doesn't seem to be that worth it. I would just leave it on the anti-tank mode, but it's nice that you have that option. Honestly, I don't know what's wrong with me for ever doubting this. S tier for the bots. But let's turn the temperature up on this next one because yes, we have the Flam 40 Flamethrower, which spits fire damage out to the enemies, and that can have a damage over time effect. Now, for the bots, this is a tough one because in order to use this, you have to get in close proximity to the enemies, and closing that gap can be quite a pain. One good thing though is that the flames will impact heavy targets, and with the recent buff to its impact on bigger enemies, this also means you can do things like get a Hulk from the front, and it will feel pretty decent when you do it. This also does pretty well versus most of the other medium enemies and can even down a factory strider fairly well as the war striders decently fast, and all of that are positives. But despite feeling much better than it did before, unfortunately you just can't change the fact that you can only be effective at really close ranges. And to me, that just doesn't really gel too well on a front where you more likely want to have things like heavy armor, where you more likely want to be getting behind cover, shooting at long distances. It just makes it overall a struggle to get close enough to use this. And when you are in the heat of things, it makes things very dangerous. For all that, I'm going to give it a C for the bots. But now for a crowd favorite, the AC-8 Autocannon. And this fires fast, explosive rounds that can be modified to either shoot more powerful targeted explosives or flak rounds for more spread out explosions. Now versus the bots, this is amazing. The ability to shoot fast rockets and take out everything feels great. This has a good bit of stagger too, and a pretty decent fire rate, which can deal with hulks and striders and devastators pretty well. Now the flak rounds here are a little bit less noticeable as the bots tend to spread out a little bit, but it's still nice to have that option when they are close together. I also like how easily this takes gunships down, and while it's not the best, it can still go for the factory striders. For war striders, it's also not the best as it does take a lot of shots and often more than a single mag worth, but it still can take them out. Of course, this also comes at the sacrifice of a backpack slot, but this is so good that it just is still worth it. And the reloading time honestly isn't too bad either.
Now, I know the autocannon is a favorite from many, and I definitely think it's strong and powerful, but I do think a good number of these other support weapons have now kind of started to outshine it. So for that, I'm going to give it a high A for the bots.
But moving on, we have the MG206 heavy machine gun, which is a machine gun, but it has tough handling and inflicts heavy armor penetration. This also has a stationary reload, but it can be fired at various speeds, which you can adjust depending on your preference and ability to stabilize your aim. Now, the heavy machine gun does feel pretty decent versus the bots. The damage on this is pretty nice, such that you can tear through just about everyone and fast, being able to utilize this versus a group of bunched up enemies. And with the heavy armor penetration, you don't really have to worry so much about where you're actually hitting them. And this will actually shred things like the Hulks, which is especially nice when they are running straight for you, as you can just fire at them without needing to be too precise. This also is pretty good for the War Striders, being able to hit them in their arms to disarm them or their legs and crotch to kill them. Now, this does have a good bit of recoil to it, but what I typically like to do versus the bots is to slow the RPMs down and pulse fire a bit, so you can use this at more range. And speaking of which, it's not super bad versus the gunships or even the turrets from afar. It even can take out a factory strider, but it's just not the best, and the ammo can feel a little bit sparse, but it feels overall pretty powerful. I will give it an A for the bots. Now, this next one has a bit of a reputation for killing not only the enemies, but sometimes yourself and your teammates. And of course, I'm talking about the RL-77 Airburst rocket launcher, which shoots out essentially a bunch of cluster bombs that can be used to clear a wide area and generally is only going to be effective versus clumps of enemies. And versus the bots, this can be okay. It can be nice for doing a lot of starting damage to a bot hotspot, and generally when bots are clumped up, it can take a good number of them out. But given the higher armor levels on this front, it can really only do so much. The reloading here is quite slow. It's not a huge problem, but it still bothers me. And you do have to wear a backpack, which I don't know if it feels worth it. The other thing here is it doesn't really feel super consistent at getting the damage you want, and so it's hard to really know if your shot is going to wreck house or miss a lot of the targets. Generally, understanding the horizontal cluster pattern helps, but still the bounces and other physics that occur can make it a little bit of a rough science. It's nice having the cluster mode here, which will explode on a timer rather than when it gets into proximity. A lot of people like this, and there are certainly people who have mastered this and do really well with this, but to me, I just still don't know why I would ever want to take this out when something like the Eagle cluster bomb exists, which gives me 5 quick uses before needing to rearm and doesn't require me to have a backpack. For all that, this gets a C for the bots. Now, one of my favorites is next, the MLS-4X Commando, which is a disposable launcher, sort of like the EAT, but this one shoots out smaller rockets instead of one big explosion, and it has a slightly slower cooldown time. Now, versus the bots, this is an interesting one. It does deal a good bit of damage, and versus things like the Striders and the Devastators, it can one-shot them. It also mostly takes 2 shots for the Hulks. I also love that this can one-shot the gunships, but getting on target is another story. You might end up wasting shots, but at least you can use the laser tracker to make some rough adjustments on the fly. This also can be a little bit rougher versus things like the Factory Strider, as it's not the most ideal pick. And this will likely take 2 crotch shots to the War Striders in order to take them out, but it often took me 3 just due to my poopy aim. The low cooldown is nice, but it does feel like you use up the bullets quicker, and I just don't feel as great having this around versus something like the EAT. I'll give it a B for the bots. The RS-422 Railgun is next, which is a very high damaging anti-tank gun that if you have in its unsafe mode can do even more damage the higher you hold it down for the trade-off of, well, exploding on yourself. And versus the bots, this thing does really well. Being able to one-shot Devastators, Berserkers, and Striders, especially if it's in that unsafe mode. Just be careful holding that down. This will also stun, stagger, and wreck hulks, as well as being able to one-shot them if you can hit them in the eye. You can also use this against the factory striders, although it will take a good deal of time. This is also capable of taking down a war strider and can damage them from anywhere, but I will say it's a bit of a disappointment in how many bullets this seems to take. Perhaps I needed to charge this down further in the unsafe mode, but even aiming for the same spot on a leg took me quite a bit of ammo to take this guy down. This is though pretty good for things like tanks and turrets, and overall this feels good and accurate with enough bullets to clear the field of medium guys mostly in one shot, so you can save your primary for the smaller enemies.
While it does take a lot of shots versus the most heavy enemies, I still really like how powerful this is for a lot of that medium-sized enemies, just being able to clear them out so fast. For all that, I gotta give this an S for the bots.
The next gun on the list is the FAF-14 Spear, which is an auto lock-on weapon that fires super explosive anti-tank rockets, and versus the bots, this is pretty good. This auto locks onto the biggest enemies and takes most of them out in a single shot. Hulks get one shot, tanks get one shot, turrets get one shot, gunships get one shot, and fabricators also get one shot. Even rocket striders get one shot, although that might be a waste of ammo. Now, unlike the Recoilless Rifle, this actually will take the dropships down from the middle, being a more effective way to clear all the enemies on board. And the best part here is you can do all of this from super far away without aiming, and that can be very effective for clearing the hardest enemies out before you even arrive. This also will take 2 shots to the factory striders. You just need to be kind of careful where you're locking your target onto, and this also is going to one-shot the war striders, which is awesome. The main downside is just having a little bit less ammo, but being that you can one-shot so many of the biggest things in front of you, it's just nice to be able to delete these guys and make your mission a lot safer. To me, this gets an S tier for the bots. Moving on, we have the Killzone themed weapon, the STX3 W.A.S.P launcher, and this is sort of like a mix between the Spear and the Commando, as this fires smaller missiles that can be auto-locked onto targets, and this also has the ability to fire individual missiles out in bursts or one big missile in its artillery mode. Now, for the bots, this definitely has some use here. While the Spear is good for auto-locking onto the biggest targets, this is good for locking onto the medium targets, being something that you can use to just wipe the map of berserkers, devastators, and striders, as well as tanks and turrets. Unfortunately, I have not found the artillery mode to be that useful, which is a shame since it uses up so much of your ammo, and that kind of sucks. But what I find works best is using the burst mode, but single firing to individual medium targets. Often these guys will go down in 1 to 2 shots, so tapping gently, only letting 1 or 2 out at a time allows you to target multiple enemies and get them in one mag. This also is pretty great for the gunships, being able to take them out in 1 but sometimes 2 shots, which is really nice since you don't have to aim. This does struggle a bit with the bigger targets and will take a ton for factory striders and really struggles versus the hulks and versus fabricators, but it will be able to take them down eventually. This also struggles quite a bit versus the war striders, taking multiple reloads, and that can be just rough. All in all, this can serve you decently versus the medium guys and gunships, which is pretty cool, but you're still going to need something for the bigger guys, and taking up a backpack slot seems like a bit of a big ask.
I will give this a C for the bots.
Next, the GL21 grenade launcher, and this is a fast-firing launcher that lobs grenades in an arc-like pattern for high explosive damage. And versus the bots, this is pretty solid. What I love about this is this will wreck everything at the Devastator level and below, and the splash damage just gets a lot of these guys out very quickly. It also has utility, being able to take out the fabricators if you shoot for the holes. Now, this won't be the best for the elites, and it can't do anything for the war striders, but since this clears out the smaller guys so well, it really helps deal with a lot of the mayhem. For that, I'm going to give it an A for the bots. Now, the LAS-98 laser cannon is a pretty unique one. This has unlimited ammo and will emit a laser beam that catches enemies on fire. And versus the bots, this is pretty solid. The infinite ammo definitely helps, as well as being able to use this to snipe enemies from afar and not having to worry about ammo. It can take out Striders, Devastators, and Berserkers easily, and it also does pretty decent work of the Hulks and even the gunships. This actually also feels great versus the War Striders, aiming for their crotch or leg and catching them on fire. And they seem to go down relatively quickly with this. You can also take out a factory strider with this, although it's not going to be the most efficient. This feels great, so I'm going to give this a high A for the bots. Now our next one, the ARC-3 Arc Thrower, also has infinite ammo, but instead shoots out lightning, which can chain to multiple enemies, damaging them and staggering them. Now versus the bots, I really like this because it has infinite ammo, of course, and you can use this to perpetually stun multiple enemies while also dealing damage to them as the lightning arcs from enemy to enemy. But what brings us even higher is you can use this to stun and kill a Hulk, basically making them useless. You can even kind of stun a factory strider too. It won't stun them fully, like they can still make Devastators, but you can freeze up its ability to move. That being said, it will take a lot of damage, so you may want to have someone else helping you finish that job. What's weird about this though is that while this will damage the War Striders, it won't actually stun them. And this is actually quite a bit frustrating, as with another arc weapon that we will talk about soon, these guys can be stunned. So it doesn't really make sense that the Arc Thrower is not going to be able to do that. Another thing this struggles against is the tanks not really dishing out a lot of damage and not really doing anything to stop them. I do like this for small to medium guys, but it does have quite a few notable downsides. I will give it a B for the bots. But now we have the LAZ-99 Qasar Cannon, which is an anti-tank weapon that launches a rechargeable laser explosive, similar to what the EAT can do. And I really love the Qasar Cannon versus the bots. The auto reloading on this is very useful, allowing you to focus more on moving from place to place, taking your shots as the charge is ready. And this is also able to one-shot many things like the Hulks, the drop ships if you shoot them in the thrusters. This can one-shot gunships. It will even one-shot War Striders if you hit them in the crotch. This will take 1 to 2 shots versus the tanks, and it can even take out the factory Striders. This also can one-shot fabricators from so far away, which is really nice, being able to basically snipe them and not needing to worry at all about ammo. The main downside on this is the wind-up, which can be a little bit tough to wait for when getting fired upon, but if you just get a little bit behind cover and time it well, you'll be just fine. I really like this. This gets an S tier for the bots. But next up, we have the TX41 Sterlizer, which works much like the Flamethrower, but instead of flames, will release toxic gas spray that will cause corrosive damage to enemies as well as confusion. And the Sterlizer is not the best for the bots. This thing can do a decent job confusing and distracting enemies for a bit, and that can provide a bit of relief for you, especially after a recent buff where the effects last longer. It also does do some damage to the enemies, but not a ton, and it doesn't really seem to have the ability to confuse bigger enemies like the War Striders or the Factory Striders. Now, while I do mostly like gas on this front, I don't think the Sterlizer is the best method to deploy it. You have gas grenades and gas strikes, for instance, which can cover a larger area and just require a toss, as opposed to going around trying to individually spray targets to get these effects onto them. Not to mention, you need to get in close range in order to reach anyone, which is just a lot of trouble, and it's really not worth it. I really don't think this is good for the bots, so this is going to get a poop hater for me. But if you thought that was bad, just wait till you get to this next one, the CQC-1 One True Flag, which is a melee weapon stratagem that calls down the flag of Super Earth itself, so that you can do the very OP thing of waving it valiantly on the battlefield. Now, what is actually possible with this versus the bots is not much. This allows for melee damage, which is not super impactful, although once you do get to an enemy, it can eventually take them down. And they even changed this a little bit, allowing you to plant this down into an enemy, sticking it to them, which can be pretty funny, but it also feels like a bit of a missed opportunity to be able to maybe apply a bleeding effect to those enemies. The truth is, though, this is mostly for democratic cosplay, gameplay, which actually isn't bad. I mean, it's actually a nice reminder that this game is just about fun, and despite providing next to no help on the battlefield, I just can't help but enjoy myself when I have this thing equipped, waving this in my teammates' faces while I let them do all the work. It actually is a fun addition, but definitely is a poop hater tier as it relates to gameplay. But we actually have another grenade launcher in the arsenal. We have the GL52 De-Escalator, which lobs arc grenades that send shocks to multiple different enemies, hurting them and stunning them. And versus the bots, this is really solid. The arc grenades lob to multiple enemies, which stun them nicely, but also do a decent bit of damage. This also allows you to manage big clumps of enemies at a time, both stopping them from moving and hurting them in the process. This even works pretty well for the Hulks, stopping them in their tracks, although it will take you a little bit if you're going to try to take them head on. Instead, you can either use this as a way to shoot around at their back, or better yet, if you can shoot these arcs a little bit behind them, I have found that the electricity will get at their backside, making for an even quicker takedown. Now, unfortunately, this isn't going to be able to close fabricators, and also this doesn't really stun tanks or factory striders, although they still will damage them, so at least it has that impact. This does shock the war striders and does seem to damage them a little bit, although quite slowly, but I like being able to stun them so that they can't attack you, and also use them as a backboard to shock nearby enemies as well. Now, another slight downside here is that it does have a lower capacity and it reloads rather slowly, but at least the rounds reload means you don't have to wait until you exhaust your mag. You can reload this at any time without worrying about losing your arc grenades. Overall, I'm a big fan of this on this front. To me, it gets an S tier for the bots. But hot from the control group Warbond is a super exciting one, the Plas 45 Epoch, which is our first ever plasma support weapon. We already know plasma primaries are super strong, so to have a plasma support weapon is gonna be good. Now, this has a charge up shot, which the longer you hold down, the bigger the heavy armor penetrating damage, for the trade-off of being very unsafe, because if you do hold this down for too long, it will blow up in your face. Sort of like the Railgun, although this has no safe mode. Now, for the bots, as you can expect, this thing is very strong, but with a few caveats. The basic shot with a smaller amount of charge can be good for medium targets and a little bit of splash damage, but the real power of this comes when you try to maximize that charge. And when you do, this thing can do a lot of damage. I swear I got one shot on a Hulk, but most of the times I tried to replicate that, it took two, so we'll go with two. But this can one-shot a gunship, and things like turrets can also be taken out with one well-charged shot. Fabricators do take two shots, and into a clump of enemies, this will deal a good bit of splash damage. Now, you can try to understand how to properly charge this by either looking at the little nodes, and when they press in hard, that means it's time to release, or paying attention to the charge bar, which is bigger in first person. Now, although these are good cues, it is still a bit hard to get a handle on this, and I found myself messing up a lot. Largely because I think the window for big damage is very small. You also do have to deal with a slight arc pattern on this, as well as a quite low capacity and a stationary reload, and those are all definitely downsides. And I will say this is just okay for the war striders. It seems to take two well-charged shots to the crotch, but that's a little bit easier said than done. It's hard to stand in one spot timing shots while avoiding their attacks. Also, with the factory striders, it is a bit hard to get a lot of damage. You need to be pretty stable, have a good angle, and be able to lob those shots correctly. Now, at the time of making this thing has some serious sway, which can cause you to miss your target quite often. But this is supposed to be patched, so while it was definitely a problem during testing, I'm not counting that towards the ranking. Still though, while this definitely has potential, I think it still falls a little bit flat. The low charge shots don't feel too much better than a Plasma Punisher, and while the well charged shots are really substantial, the risk is just really high with that short window, coupled with the capacity issues, and I don't think this is as good as it really should be. I'm gonna give it a B for the bots. And so here we have our list. This is how the support weapons stack up when facing off against the automatons. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments and check out my other tier lists as we cover all aspects of this game. Thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement, but otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.